So we've got our active side. Great. Problem solved, right? After all, that is what Marx has been after so far, is this active side. That's what he wants. And he tells us that idealism has developed it. They've developed the active side. Marx, of course, is not an idealist. He's a materialist. So at this point, should we expect Marx to switch teams here and say, you know what? I'm done with materialism. I'm going to be an idealist from now on. No, because for Marx, although idealism has developed the active side, they have not developed it in a way that is satisfying to him. As he writes, they have developed it only abstractly. And the reason he gives for this, for why idealism developed it abstractly, is because idealism does not know real sensuous activity as such. So two questions arise for us here. What does Marx mean when he says that idealism has developed the active side abstractly? And what does Marx mean by real sensuous activity? And why does he say that idealism does not know it as such? What does he mean there? Well, when someone says abstract, we're thinking about, okay, what's it abstract from? What is it abstract in relation to? By only abstractly, by saying that the active side of idealism is an abstract one, since Marx is principally concerned here with developing an active side which just is the activity of human beings, an abstract active side will be an active side that just does not count human activity as that active side. So the active side of idealism is not going to be placed within the sensuous. It's not going to be placed within the physical, the material, the stuff we can see and touch. It is rather, as we saw in the last video, located within the mind. So it is not sensuous activity, but mental activity. And while Marx certainly thinks mental activity is important, which is a point that a lot of people don't always take into account with Marx, he was not anti-thinking, anti-consciousness. In fact, as we saw in the first part of the first thesis, the absence of an accounting of consciousness is the chief defect he sees in materialism. So it's very important for him. It's very important for the kind of philosophy he wants to do. But he's not going to go so far, which would amount to stepping into being an idealist. He's not going to go to the extreme that idealism go to, where the mind is privileged over the material, or in some even more extreme cases, it simply replaces the material. Just to review, the last video we talked about one specific moment in idealism, specifically German idealism in this case, a specific moment in German idealism, which we saw with Kant, with his transcendental idealism, where the structure of our minds aids in representing or representing the external world to us. And that is a necessarily active process. Thus, we can say that the mind plays an active role in shaping our perceptions of reality. That's where our active side is. That's as far as idealism is able to get us at that point. When we're talking about an active side, one way we can think about an active side is that it answers a question, the question of what gets things done in the world, in society. How does it get it done? How do things get accomplished when things change for better or worse? What is driving that? If you say that the active side is mental activity, then what you're saying is that what drives changes in society, again, is mental activity. And that's a big problem from a Marxist perspective. Marx thinks that it isn't ideas that drive change or drive history. It is material conditions. To give an example of what this looks like, because it's very important to understand what the implications are for accepting any one of these views, including Marx's. But in this case, we're looking at what it would entail to accept such a view as the one we've been talking about, the idealist view of the mind, where the mind is the playing the active role, it is the active side of reality. It's what's driving things. It's what makes things happen. Well, let's consider how that view would look if we applied it to something in history, some major event or series of events in history. The example that I like is the French Revolution. It's no secret that the French Revolution, in a sense, began in the salons. It began in the intellectual discussion groups where people like Danton and Robespierre and all these other guys would get together and discuss all these Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Rousseau, and they would sit around at these tables drinking lots of wine, reading these great new ideas, and they would say, I think we can do better. I think we can build a better world. We can do it. We can make a better society. And that was the result of being inspired by great thinkers, great ideas. The revolution itself, the revolution proper, the storming of the Bastille, when people rose up and took up arms in the streets and stormed Versailles and physically removed the king and queen from the palace, their luxurious, comfortable life in Versailles, and placed them in the heart of France, in Paris, amongst their subjects who were starving. Did Voltaire do that? Or Rousseau? Did the people, the common folk of France, rise up because they read some great inspiring book? No, they were freaking hungry. They were starving while the king and queen were living these lives of luxury. There was a bread shortage. There wasn't enough to eat. People were dying of starvation. That is what Marx calls a material condition. That is ultimately what drove people to take up arms and get into the streets and start the revolution. This is not to say that the ideas that were developed in the salons, culminating in, of course, the Declaration of the Rights of Man, is not to say that these ideas were not important. They arguably were indispensable to the revolution taking shape. But ultimately, reading these great books and stuff is not, it's nothing. It just doesn't compare to starving, to dying of starvation. It just doesn't, it pales in comparison. That is what is going to drive people to revolt, to rise up and take what is being taken from them. A lot of people will think, well, if people just get better ideas, they'll do better. If people have a better idea about how to treat one another, how to treat each other, as long as we have better ideas about how to do that, it'll just happen. Well, from a Marxist perspective, it won't, until conditions in the society actually drive these changes.